Penna Dexter.
Thank you very much for joining us, ladies and gentlemen. I am Penna Dexter, sitting in for Kirby Anderson. It's been a busy week, and we've got a busy show today. Lots of things to cover. I would say one very interesting guest we are going to pull in a little bit later in the program is Hannah Smith. She was elected to the school board in a town not far from where we're sitting in South Lake, Texas, where they've been battling critical race theory, and the parents got so up in arms and excited that they basically switched power not only in the school board, but also in the city council and mayoral races there. So that's an interesting topic we will discuss in just a few minutes. Also, the question, should Liz Cheney lose her leadership position in the House of Representatives? We'll try to answer that, banty it about a little bit. And then in Florida, they've actually passed election reform, and it's very close to happening in the state of Texas. Lots of states are doing so. Why is this happening? And how does this play into the political equation? And then is the teachers union, does it have too much influence on the CDC reopening guidelines? It does, and we're going to talk about why. But first, I want to introduce my two co-hosts, both attorneys from First Liberty Institute. I'm so glad they're both here, given all the topics we've got. Kelly Shackelford is with me, and also Jeremy Dyes. And gentlemen, I think the topic of the hour or of the segment is a great win you guys had in the Brown case, which we've discussed before. And Kelly, first of all, give us a little recap.
Very unusual case. This is a case of a juror who was actually thrown off the jury by a federal judge after the trial's over, during deliberations, because the juror said that they were going to rely upon the Holy Spirit in their determination, which, my little joke is, the oath is, I guess, fine as long as you don't believe in the oath, so help me God. Because when somebody prays and, actually gets help, then they're excluded from the jury. This went up to the Federal Court of Appeals, but not just the Federal Court of Appeals. Normally you get, 3 judges at random in a Federal Court of Appeals out of like 15 or 20 or however many judges. In the 11th Circuit, and this was out of Florida, and the 11th Circuit covers Florida and the southeastern part of the United States. It was en banc, meaning you had all 11 federal appeals judges sitting at one time to hear the case. It's a huge issue. It would affect, obviously, juries all over the country. And so we had Paul Clement as our lead counsel. I mean, Paul's known as the best oral advocate in the country in these kinds of cases. And anyway, the good news is last night we heard that we had won the case 7-4. And this is a really significant victory for both religious freedom, but also just for our jurors being treated appropriately. I mean, it's really outrageous what happened. And, of course, now what's going to happen is they got to go all the way back down and redo the trial again because the judge did this, which was really inappropriate. But it's a really important victory, really the highest level precedent in the country on this. And, you can't get any higher than the Supreme Court. When you go to en banc, you're as high as you can get. So this is a really important decision and a good victory.
Jeremy, I'm scratching my head wondering what gets into a judge that would dismiss someone for relying on the Holy Spirit and just voicing that in deciding a case.
Yeah, me either. But now they don't have to worry about that so much, at least there in the 11th Circuit. And that's going to have influence throughout the rest of the country as well. Because as Kelly mentioned, that's aside from going to the Supreme Court of the United States, it's about as high as you can go within the federal court system without actually imploring the justices of the Supreme Court to make a decision here. And I'll just note what Justice Pryor, I just elevated him, Chief Judge Pryor said in his opinion. He said, jurors may pray for and believe they have received divine guidance as they determine another person's innocence or guilt. A profound civic duty, but a daunting task, to say the least. I mean, that's really important things for us here. As Kelly joked about, you can take the oath, but whether or not you believe it, that's the question that remains opening here. Judge Pryor saying, yeah, you can not only take the oath, you can actually believe it. You're welcome to be in the public. You're welcome to even exercise your tasks as a juror by thinking through and invoking divine guidance on these things. We can pray in public, we can pray in private, and it's our right to admit that you've done so. You won't be disqualified from a jury when you do.
And, some of the facts, Penna, are amazing here because when you go through and you read if people want to, I know there's a link at Point of View and they can, get the information. Or they can go to firstliberty.org as well. We have in our press release and stuff, we have a link to the opinion where people can look at it. I mean, this judge asked numerous questions of this juror. Did you understand the jury instructions of following the evidence and the law and all? Yes. And basically, he asked numerous questions, and the juror said, oh, yeah, I was paying attention to all that. I followed all of that. And so it wasn't like the juror said, I didn't care what the evidence was. I was just going to go with, what. No,
it wasn't like he was replacing being a good juror and considering all the facts with relying on the Holy Spirit.
Right.
The two go together.
Exactly. Yeah. And this is evidently a concept the judge didn't get. And really, I think ultimately at play in these kinds of things, you've got people who don't get people of faith, and they don't understand, and they it's just pure. I mean, I'm not saying it's intentional, but it's just discrimination. You treat people in certain ways because you don't understand them, and but you should understand, even if you're a judge who doesn't totally clue into people relying upon the Holy Spirit, you should still clue into the fact that this country is built on religious freedom, and that we have 2 clauses of the First Amendment protecting religious freedom, and that we treat our juries in a certain way. We don't just start throwing people off juries, especially after they've been through the entire trial and they're in the deliberations. So really odd when you look at the facts even more, but I think a really good victory. And something that'll, I think, serve people across the country. I mean, it'll number one, if you're a person that is, I mean, your freedom is at stake. I mean, this is a criminal trial. I mean, you don't want judges. I mean, think about it. I mean, if you're a listener and you're a believer, and there's this person that's relying upon the Holy Spirit in the jury, you really want all of them thrown off the jury? I don't think so.
Right.
I mean, this would be a really bad thing for our country. So this is an important victory.
Speaking of not getting it, yesterday was National Day of Prayer, and Joe Biden, in his speech regarding that, conveniently, and Franklin Graham and others pointed this out, he left out any mention of God. And, it's so interesting because when it comes to religious liberty, Donald Trump did a lot. And I talked about this earlier in the week with Mike Berry, who, by the way, did a great live stream yesterday for you guys on the military. But Jeremy, this president has undone a lot of the good that Trump did as far as religious liberty through his executive orders. And, we could probably see more of that judging from yesterday, where even though he's a Catholic, he didn't even mention God.
Well, it makes you wonder to whom we are praying. But, going back a couple months, the left has always struggled with a lot of this prayer in public stuff. At least the president, in announcing this, didn't end any prayer that he led outdoors or inside or in public with amen and a woman. So at least we got that going for us here, I suppose. But we need to think through hard about how we go about these things. And clearly this isn't rocket science here. This should have been something that is pretty simple for most Americans to figure out.
I think so. Next up, we'll have another attorney join us. She's also a new school board member in the South Lake School District. We'll talk about why after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
This last year has been a challenge for our society, but now we can add to those challenges the political challenges that have come against our nation in the last few months. Victor Davis Hanson wonders, how much ruin do we have left? The President and Congress are challenging the constitutional order and centuries of custom and tradition. Hanson reminds us that a nation's institutions are its bedrock, yet the Electoral College and the Constitution's emphasis on individual states establishing voting laws are under assault. Already gone is the 176-year-old tradition of a pivotal November election day, the 152-year-old 9-member Supreme Court, the 184-year-old Senate filibuster, and the 62-year-old idea of a 50-state union are all being targeted by the new Democratic Party. Rewriting the election laws of every state, adding 4 additional members to the Supreme Court, ending the Senate filibuster, and turning the District of Columbia into a separate state seemed unlikely even a year ago. The political class seems ready to move forward on every one of these issues and much more. And then economic challenges lie ahead because of the national debt, which has now surpassed $28 trillion. After military campaigns in Afghanistan, Iraq, and Libya, our military seems more focused on the sort of people serving in the military. Some of the politicized top brass seem more worried about the politics of their own soldiers than the dangers of foreign militaries. And let's not forget that our nation is being pulled apart by protests, riots, and daily claims of systemic racism. America's on the brink, and I wonder whether this nation can stand much more. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Go deeper on topics like you just heard by visiting pointofview.net. That's pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Welcome back to Point of View. I'm so excited for our next guest. She is Hannah Smith, and she is a wife and mother in a town nearby the studio that we're sitting in, South Lake, Texas. She's been in a battle for the past, I think, couple of years, really for the soul of the schools there. And now she's at a new level. But first I want to go back a little bit because Hannah has specialized in appellate and religious freedom law. She's contributed over 25 briefs at the U.S. Supreme Court. And she was senior counsel at the Becket Fund for Religious Liberty for a decade. She also clerked for two U.S. Supreme Court justices, Clarence Thomas and Samuel Alito. She graduated from Princeton and also BYU Law School. And Kelly knows her, so he wants to embellish upon that a little bit before we bring Hannah into the discussion to tell the story of what happened in South Lake Carroll School District.
Well, Hannah, I'm just thrilled that you're on. I told Penna and I'll tell everybody, I mean, when I saw this controversy happening where they brought in this horrible curriculum to a really good school district, and I'm sure the parents were just kind of caught, by surprise. When I heard that you were getting involved, I went, uh-oh, they're in trouble. Hannah is going to be involved. Not only is she very capable, but she's a mama bear too. And then when I heard you were running for office, I couldn't have been more thrilled. So the story that happened in South Lake has now been heard all over the country. I've seen stories everywhere. But tell us a little bit about what happened and how this started and how which you had no intention of running for school board, how that happened to you.
Well, thank you both for having me on today, and thank you, Kelly, so much. I've just so enjoyed working with you and First Liberty over the years, and I'm just so happy that you're on today. I'm the mom of 4 kids that are in the South Lake Carroll ISD school district, we were very involved with our kids' schools through the PTA and through a lot of different things. But last August, there was a board meeting at which the Cultural Competence Action Plan was presented. And initially it was just supposed to be presented to the board, but then there ended up being a motion to accept the plan and to do further workshops on it. And there was a vote of 5-2 to accept the plan, and only 2 of the board members dissented. And at that point, the community really erupted, really concerned about the political ideology that was in the CCAP and what it would do to radically transform our district. And so a group of really concerned parents and community members got to work, and that's how it all started.
Hannah, this cultural, the title, the way they name things, Cultural Competency Action Plan. It's really critical race theory, which we've been talking about on Point of View. And, I know that when parents find out what that is, they get pretty upset. And it's not just the conservatives, is it?
No, it's actually a lot of people who are concerned about keeping politics out of our schools. Parents really want to parent their own kids, and teachers should teach the kids, math, reading, writing, science, history. And so, a lot of parents in our community were just concerned that we were politicizing our education of our kids. And you're right. I mean, the term cultural competency is very deceptive because the other side has been saying all along, well, this is just about helping our kids learn more about other cultures. And honestly, if that's all it were, I would totally be on board with that because I'm all about exposing my kids to different cultures and different experiences and people with different backgrounds. I think that's an enriching opportunity for everyone to be able to understand people who are different from them. And honestly, I've spent 20 years of my life representing people of different faiths in courts across the country and at the Supreme Court, and especially minority faiths because they're usually the ones that get persecuted the most. But Cultural Competency Action Plan really had nothing to do with teaching about culture and had everything to do about instilling critical race theory into our schools, and that's why we opposed it.
Jeremy Dyes is also with us here in the studio co-hosting today. And Jeremy, when you look at this critical race theory, and when you have kids being taught to be ashamed that they're white, for instance, to look at our country as racist from its very beginnings, this type of thing, we're seeing it all over the country now. But this district, I think it somehow came to the parents early on, and they rose up, and it's not surprising that other parents across the country are upset about this.
No, not at all. It certainly is a difficult conversation to be having generally on the issue of race because none of it can be had without any removal of emotion through the whole thing. And maybe there's good reason for some of that. But it is also a conversation that is first and foremost one that ought to be held around the kitchen table with mom and dad and the kids and that sort of thing. That's why I'm so excited about Hannah and her willingness to jump in on this and to run for the school board. She very easily could have just sat on the sidelines and rested on her very illustrious career, having done all the incredible work that she's done throughout her entire career thus far, and said, somebody else should do that, right? I've paid my dues. I've taken my wounds. I've taken my battles where I've taken them. Maybe it's somebody else's turn to step up, but she didn't. She stood up and said, no, I'm going to run for this. And so I'm going to end this with also a question to Hannah, and I'd love to have her response on this because I think she's thought through this well and has authority to speak on it. Hannah has gone and done some incredible things. She's argued in some incredible places. She's been on TV shows that, I've not even been on, and Kelly hasn't even been on, and she's been, with professors that neither of us have had as well. So she's got a great amount of background on all these things. And yet she still won this race. I shouldn't say, and still she won this race. She prioritized this as something. But I don't think you have to be a Hannah Smith to run for these offices. So Hannah, what do you say to everybody else around the country who is a mom like you are? Maybe they don't have the academic pedigree that you have, but are still very concerned about these issues. What do they do in the face of all these challenging times within their school boards and city councils and things like that?
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. I have talked to a lot of people since my appearance on Fox and Friends this last week. People who around the country are trying to fight the same thing that we fought here and want to know how we did it and how they can do it too. And I'm just really encouraging them to band together with like-minded parents. There are organizations at the national level like FIRE, the Foundation for Individual Rights in Education, that has a K through 12 outreach program that was hugely helpful to me in this process, and who put me in contact with parents around the country that we held conference calls together to talk about strategy and how we would fight this. So just to know that they're not alone and that they can band together with like-minded parents and really effectuate change, I think is really important. And you can make a difference. It doesn't matter your background or, your experience level. People who just think critically about what is being presented to them and articulate carefully the arguments against it, I think are going to succeed, because anyone who rationally thinks about this understands that it's not a good idea to divide our kids based on the color of their skin, that we should be promoting unity and not divisiveness.
Hannah, one of the things that I saw that I thought was amazing too, and I'm sure it contributed to things, is that the churches there in town, including one of the largest churches in the country, from the pulpit said, we're not voting in these local elections. And they really challenged everybody. They didn't tell them who to vote for, but they challenged them to get educated and to actually show up for these local elections where so few people were controlling everything. And I'm sure that was part of bringing people out, but I thought that was really encouraging to see.
It was. And, we were so happy to see the local pastors get up in their services before the election and say, guys, you can't complain if you don't vote. So get out to vote. And normally in a municipal election without a presidential race, we had seen, anywhere from like 3,200 to 3,500 people show up on an average for a municipal election. But this election turned out 10,000 people. So
Wow.
3 times as many voters turned out in this municipal election, and we got 70% of those voters. So it was a huge response by the community. And we had done meet and greets with community members over the course of 3.5 months, where we had met in private with individuals, like groups of 20 or 30 people, sometimes larger, but we did over 70 meet and greets over 3.5 months. So we really went out into the community, talked to people who were retired, who didn't have kids in the school district anymore, didn't know what was going on, but were deeply concerned. And so I think it was the combination of a really strong ground game, local pastors standing up and telling their parishioners to get out to vote, and just a real concern about the content of the CCAP and what it would do to our school district that really brought people out in record numbers.
Hannah, I don't know that I mentioned this sufficiently, but this was a landslide not only for you, but for others. 70% really of the vote went to replace school board members with you and someone else that was fighting CRT there in the schools. Plus, city council seats were taken over. Also, the South Lake mayor's seat. So we're going to ask you about that after the break. Our guest is Hannah Smith, attorney and Mama Bear from South Lake, Texas. We'll be right back.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. Pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this.
are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Penna Dexter.
And co-hosting with me in studio, Kelly Shackelford and Jeremy Dyes. On the line with us as our guest, Hannah Smith. And here at Point of View, one thing we've always been about in our 40-some-year history is getting people involved at the local level to make a difference in their lives. And, you know, we've had a wonderful Christian school started because somebody was listening to Point of View that's still in existence 30 years later. And people running for various offices. Jeremy Dyes, who's sitting here, was a Point of View baby. I think he listened to Point of View in his parents' back seat. And, it influenced his thinking. I know he's said that before. But, Hannah, that's why we're so excited about this story and what happened here, because it is one of those stories where people rise up, make a difference, and it doesn't matter who's in the White House, the House, or the Senate. You can make a difference in your community. It takes everyone banding together to do it. And I mentioned before the break, and this is from the Washington Examiner, which says all conservative-backed candidates in this race in South Lake Carroll won their respective races by a 30 to 70% margin. And all those other races that you came on the coattails of your school board race, Hannah, it's an incredible story.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, people turned out because they were really concerned about what was happening in our schools, and they wanted to make a difference. And they didn't want us to just win. They wanted us to win by a landslide, to send a message to our school district that they did not accept this. CRT in our schools. And I think, the city council candidates and the mayor candidate that ran, they also ran on a platform of saying, who do you want answering the calls from the media when NBC calls and asks questions about whether South Lake is racist? Who do you want answering those calls? You want somebody who's conservative, who is going to represent our city well, and who's going to say, look, we're not a systemically racist city. We're not a systemically racist school district. Sure, there may be some bad apples here and there, but we're a good city and we're good people, and we're going to protect all children. So I think that was the message that we all ran on, that we're to protect all kids. And we're to make sure that they're not, subject to harassment or bullying or racism. But this is not the way to do it, and CCAP should not be accepted.
Hannah, I know that the election that just occurred, it was, as you said, the original vote was 5-2, and there were only 2 seats up. So you took one, and so I mean, you would think that means you still would be outvoted. But I think at the same time, there was anybody who's in elected office noticed what just happened, and so things are going to definitely dramatically change. So tell us what you see ahead. Now that you've gotten this victory, what do you see occurring as far as the school district and the changes and what will be taught?
That's a really good point. So one of the incumbents that did not run again, Matt Bryant in place 4, was one of the 2 people that voted against CCAP. So he's no longer on the school district trustee board. But Cam Bryan took his place. So we have really 3 solid conservatives on the board now, and it's a board of 7. So we still are outnumbered in some regards, but I think that most everyone agrees that the CCAP is no longer a viable option for our district. So people really aren't talking about adopting the CCAP anymore. They're talking about how do we move forward to address some of these issues as they arise in a fair way, but without radically changing our district. And, we have met with the new superintendent and given him some of our ideas of how we can move forward. I think we're going to have to rebuild trust. We're going to have to rebuild transparency with the community. We're going to have to really increase the board engagement just to provide better oversight for the district. I think some of these things happened when our former superintendent was sort of asleep at the wheel, if you will. And so just having a new superintendent in who wants to, really start a new chapter fresh with new trust with the community, I think will help a great deal. And we're certainly going to steer our community in the right direction.
Hannah, talk about the national repercussions to this. I think you're going to be a pattern for others. I know that you said that you've been getting calls from around the country. How do we do this? And some people will be more successful than others, but I have a feeling there will be successes taking place as people see a directive coming out of the Department of Education for this very type of curriculum, of philosophy to be implemented nationwide. So people see that, and then they see which school is supposed to be controlled locally and at a state level. So decisions being made across the country. I think that you may have unwittingly started a movement here. And, I mean, you jump into something and you really don't know what's going to happen sometimes. And you have to make decisions of what to do with your time. And so just give us a word of encouragement for parents across the country.
Sure. No, I did a podcast with Dinesh D'Souza this last week, and he actually gave me that advice as his parting comment that we should come up with a playbook, if you will, of how other people can replicate what we did here in Southlake. Dana Lash, who's a very popular conservative radio talk show host, actually wrote an op-ed in Newsweek this last week that did attempt to start that process, laying out several points of what we did and how that led to our victory. So that's a really good place to look first for her opinion on that. She lives here in Southlake and was very aware and part of our efforts here. So I think we will probably be putting together some sort of either new organization or new resource for folks to be able to replicate this around the country. And we had no idea that that's what we would be doing when we started this process, but I think it's something that people really want now that they've seen our victory.
Yeah, I think they made a big mistake trying to slip this under the radar in the place where Hannah lives and where Dana Lash lives. That's probably a bad strategy.
Yeah, I agree. But I feel like we were really sort of the tip of the spear. I mean, I think they thought if they can do this in the reddest of red, Tarrant County, in Southlake, then they could probably do it anywhere. And so we had to take a stand and show them, no, you're not going to succeed here.
But you don't mean that to say that there's, and I know you well enough, Hannah, to know you don't mean this that way, but I want you to give some encouragement to people who don't live in the reddest of the red, right? Who don't have Dana Lash living as a next door neighbor or wherever she lives near to you, and can't call Kelly Shackelford when they got an immediate problem in their backyard like you can. Right. What do you say to the moms in Minnesota and in Brooklyn and other places like that? Are they hopeless on this? Do they just have to take this indoctrination?
No, they don't. And I actually think this is really important because, during COVID, parents were a lot more involved in their kids' education than I think they'd ever been before. When kids were home on quarantine and their kids were on their laptops at home and parents were able to look over their shoulder and see what was happening in the classroom and see the resources that were being used online. I mean, parents really, I think, were surprised by a lot of the things that they saw. And so that led to a lot of open records requests that we did to the school district asking for what is this information that I'm seeing on my kid's computer, Brain Pop, other resources that were used that had serious CRT indoctrination within them. And so I would encourage people who don't live in very conservative towns to just start doing some open records requests, start banding together with like-minded parents, start asking for some of these things through legitimate means like, the open meetings, the open records requests that you can do. Start attending your school board meetings, start speaking out during public comments. Just be really active and coalesce together. We had a Facebook page that we had where people shared resources. Our community organized a PAC, a political action committee of conservative folks in our community. So there's a lot of things that you can do, even if you don't live in a red community, where you can really stand up and have your voices heard.
Hannah, thank you so much for joining us today and explaining all of this. And really, we thank you for taking the time and energy to fight this battle, to be an inspiration and a leader, not only to those in your own community, but to folks across the country. We are facing so many totalitarian instincts in America, and critical race theory and getting our kids indoctrinated that this is not a good country and we don't have roots that are the ones that we've been trying to teach them traditionally. It's a battle, and I think it does have to be kind of fought from the grassroots, and you have been doing that. So, I mean, what you've done is important. I know a lot of people have been telling you that, but we want to add our voice to that, and thank you very much for joining us today.
Well, thank you all so much. I so appreciate being on your show today.
She's a hardworking mama bear attorney. We've been seeing her actually in a lot of media, and it's a good thing. Mm-hmm. As a matter of fact, Tony Perkins at Family Research Council had her on his show, and he said they titled their little piece on this, "Parents Drown CRT in South Lake." I thought that was cute. Ladies and gentlemen, next up, if you're listening online, you'll hear my commentary, which sort of relates to this issue called Equity in Education. And then next up, we're going to talk about what's happening to the Republican Party. What is its future? Kind of bring up the whole idea of the leadership position of Liz Cheney in Congress. We'll do that after this. Stay with us for more of Point of View. Education officials in the state of Virginia are taking a serious look at changing the way mathematics is taught. According to the Virginia Mercury, standardized test scores show that Black, Hispanic, and low-income students have lower pass rates than white and Asian students. There's a proposed initiative to lower the standards so struggling students can succeed. Opponents of the changes argue that the state should take steps to improve instruction for everyone. Virginia's consideration of this initiative is an example of the kind of thinking behind America's decline in essential subjects. A new buzzword in American institutions, including in education, is equity, not equality, which requires equal treatment, equal input, equal opportunity. Equity, instead, requires equal outcomes. Syndicated columnist Cal Thomas compares Virginia's math restructuring proposal to current attempts to remedy income equality. He points out that there are those who believe equity means everyone should make the same, and in the case of math, be equally stupid. The obvious right course is to encourage students who show aptitude in math and help those who don't. Promoting equal outcomes in math and other subjects, he writes, can only advance mediocrity, of which we have had quite enough. The nation tried imposing outcome-based education back in the 90s. Parents pushed back. Cal Thomas warns that dumbing down key subjects will only encourage the exodus from public schools that's taking place due to pandemic lockdowns. Paul Peterson, who directs the program on education policy and governance at Harvard, says over a third of students still aren't going to a classroom every day. In many urban districts, young children attend class only 2 days a week. The loss of learning has been devastating for low-income minority kids. Parents are fed up. In a recent Wall Street Journal op-ed, Dr. Peterson describes several states' recent expansions in school choice programs, concluding that the choice bandwagon has begun to roll. School choice brings the equal opportunity students need. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Welcome back to Point of View. We've been talking about education here on the program, and Jeremy Dyes and Kelly Shackelford are in studio with me. And before we move on to politics, another national politics, I should say, just sticking on the issue of education for a moment, Hannah Smith mentioned that during COVID, a lot of parents got wind of what was going on in their schools, and they saw things they'd never seen before because they were more involved. Another thing that's happened is that they saw that they really didn't want any part of the public schools anymore. And many parents, of course, they were basically homeschooling anyway because they had their kids at home learning online. Many parents decided, well, it's working for us, so we're going to homeschool. Some parents said, I've got to get my kids out of the public school. And other parents said, well, maybe I want to do one of these hybrid schools where I know that your children did sort of the university model where you homeschool a few days a week and then you go to school. And my grandchildren are doing some of that. And so there were different decisions made. Most of them cost money. And so I think that COVID provided a good impetus for people to look at other options. And it should be a good reason for our states to look at school choice and using maybe even some of the dollars the federal government sent them to open up school choice for the kids in their state. So that's another, I would say, not a silver lining exactly, but something that has really risen out of the pandemic. And I think it's important. I think the money should follow the kid.
Well, and it's one of those anomalies because the country wants school choice. And if you look at the Democratic Party, the regular people, I mean, going to African American communities, poor communities, they want school choice. But the problem is the teachers union have such power in the Democratic Party that they won't allow any of it to pass. So it's this weird deal where people want it because they know competition always is good. It makes things better. And yet it's hard to get done across the country because of the politics.
Yeah, and we really do have, not to counteract my boss here, but we do actually have school choice.
Wow.
in this sense. You have the choice to go somewhere else. Yes. Now, I agree with you on the broader sense that it does take money to go in other places, and everybody from the judge to the janitor ought to be able to send their children to the school of their choice and educate them according to the dictates of their own conscience, not the dictates of the Department of Education's conscience, which is not one you want to follow right now. So, yes, we need to have the money following the kids, put it in a backpack, let them go where they need to go. But mom and dad, let's take a hard look at where we're at here. And if we can't move to the private school of your choice, or if homeschooling is not an option for you to instill and continue the values that you have at home, then maybe you're being called to be the next Hannah Smith. I mean, you really need to stop hard and think about that, and remember that just because that seems like it's a really daunting task. Did you hear how many times Hannah said in an interview, "We did this, we got together, a group of us did that, a group of us did this"? There was an intentional effort by more than Hannah Smith to make this thing happen. And if it takes an intentional effort by someone like Hannah Smith, who is a force of nature, to make something like this happen in a difficult district or even a more friendly district like Southlake, imagine what it's going to take in other places. So you've got to identify like-minded people in your own backyard who are insistent that the values that are common to their group are being represented within their community, not only for their own children, but for the children that are going to come after them and the children after them and so on, that these important issues are being represented well and fairly within their own community. That's all that Hannah did. And I think that was the lesson to take away from her interview, is to say, yeah, sure, Hannah Smith clerked at the Supreme Court of the United States. She's an incredible attorney. She has the phone number for people that you and I don't have access to. That doesn't matter.
We could have left all that out and still
in this case,
had a great
she
interview
was just
with Hannah.
Mom Hannah Smith. And she said, this is important for my children, and I'm going to do what's right for them. Guess what, Mom? You can do the same thing for your kids. This is the time to figure out, what is my school choice right now? And my choice is to continue with my kids going down the same path, or to figure out a better way for them. And that may not be something you can choose to do financially, to say, I'm going to send them to a private school where that'll be okay. Maybe the choice is between letting the status quo continue down the bad path that it's going down, or the choice to say, no, I'm going to change this. And it may not mean running for school board. It may just mean showing up on a Tuesday night every second Tuesday of the month to talk to the school board, at least look them in the eye and say, if you're going to pass that piece of legislation, you're going to look me in the eye when you do it, before you do it. That alone is very important. Most people have probably not been to a school board meeting. I've been to too many of them with working for this guy, right? And it's always remarkable to me to be at these school board meetings, because there's about, 4 people that are there, outside of staff members and people who are elected. If you bring in your Sunday school class to a school board meeting, they will freak out, right? They'll actually have to get a different room because they won't be able to fit them in the boardroom. They'll have to find a different place for y'all to meet because it'll be standing room only. You can have a massive impact by just simply deciding to have a field trip with your small group from church. It'd be amazing for you.
I'm glad that you kind of brought us back to that, to making a difference in your own schools, because I think that is important. I want to open up the phones also, 800-351-1212. If anyone's got a testimony about something like this has happened in their life or in their family or their community, we would love to hear from that, or a question for Kelly or Jeremy on this issue. And I will say that's really what got me involved in politics, and especially here in Texas. Some people saw me speaking about an issue before the school board, and I had just moved here, and they just said, "Oh, she's one of us." And they, befriended me, and they're lifelong friends, and we've fought many battles together over the years. But it is it's a we proposition. It's not a me. In fact, if you try to do something yourself, you won't be able to. And if you were able to, you'd burn out in a couple of years. Mm-hmm. So, anyway, that's our encouragement.
There's
for
strength
today.
in numbers, right? I mean, there's dogs hunting packs, and mama bears do too, apparently, right? I mean, it's something that you have to do as a group here to make sure that you can achieve the ends you want to achieve. If you try to do this solo, it's going to be dispiriting for one thing, because you'll not have any friends beside you to pick you up. You think Hannah went through this whole process without breaking down a couple times? She's a strong woman, but I guarantee you this was a difficult task for her. She needed people to just come back and say, no, get back in the game. You're going to be all right. This is going to be okay. So get somebody that's going to patch up the wounds and stick you back into the game, because you're going to need them, but make sure that everybody's there to pull together to get the information you need, to test the arguments you want to make, and then to just shake the trees for votes when you have to come down to Election Day.
What's amazing is how quickly they went. Basically, it was within a year's time.
Yes.
That they went from absolute disaster, some of the most ridiculous curriculum you could ever imagine for your little children, to a 70% vote in favor, wiping all this out and starting all. I mean, so
and bringing conservatives in,
yes.
It will affect other issues.
And so it just shows you, if you really want to change your community, you can change your community. And you know this phrase, but it's really true. Politics is 90% just showing up, and most people don't show up. Most people don't vote. Most people don't go to school board meetings. Most people don't get involved. And so if you get involved in your community, you're going to help change your community.
Again, the phones are open. We've got a long break, but we will take some calls after the break. 800-351-1212. I'll just set up our next topic, because we do know that there is a battle right now in the Republican Party, and it has to do, I think, at root with the influence of Donald Trump on the party. The party has changed, and it appeals to a different demographic. Donald Trump appealed to the working American, and so you've got different kinds of Republicans out there, and if they could work together, they would have a great chance of taking over the House of Representatives in the next election. The question is, will they? We'll talk about it right after this.
We live in a digital generation. Point of View is reaching this often overly plugged-in generation with truth. You can keep up with us 24 hours a day using your phone, your tablet, your laptop, or your desktop. Search for the Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, where you can keep up with today's issues, learn about current and upcoming guests by liking us on Facebook. Also, follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @PointOfViewRTS. That stands for Point of View Radio Talk Show. Learn, interact, make a difference with Point of View using new media. And here's one way you can make a big difference. Help us increase our reach by spreading the word among your friends. Share a Facebook post. Tag us in a tweet. With enough joining us to plant seeds, we'll see a tremendous harvest. Come on, it only takes a minute. Search for Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, @PointOfViewRTS on Twitter, and subscribe to the Point of View Radio Talk Show channel on YouTube. Learn, interact, share. The Point of View Radio Talk Show. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kirby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Penna Dexter.
Welcome back to Point of View. We're so glad you're with us. We have the phones open, 800-351-1212. In studio, co-hosting today are Jeremy Dyes and Kelly Shackelford from First Liberty Institute. We're going to talk a little national politics here. And many of you may have just seen little stories about this and not understand the whole inside of it. But there is a member of Congress from the state of Wyoming, very conservative place. Her name is Liz Cheney. She's the daughter of the former vice president and Dick Cheney. And she is the third most powerful member of the House of Representatives. She's the House Republican Conference chair. And she took some fire for voting for impeachment of President Trump earlier in the year. And so there was a vote. Some folks said she needs to be ousted from her leadership position. The majority leader in the House, Kevin McCarthy of California, defended her. And the vote was overwhelmingly in support of keeping her in her leadership position. So you'd think she was home free. But in the aftermath, it's kind of gone south for her, because she has continued to respond to President Trump's comments about the fact that the election was stolen from him and not legitimate, and those kinds of things that we hear. She's also had to deal with state after state after state, including this week, the state of Florida, and currently going on in the state of Texas, that election laws are being shored up. Election integrity is being protected. There's a sentiment across the country among conservatives and Republicans that whether or not President Trump was legitimately defeated, there's something wrong in our electoral system, and the COVID epidemic and all the things that were put in place to deal with that during the election made the elections less fair and less secure. States are trying to shore that up now, and we've discussed how controversial that's become. So in the midst of all that, Liz Cheney has made a lot of public statements and public comments that are actually getting her in hot water in the party, because there's a lot of support still for President Trump and his influence in the party. So she could very well lose her leadership position over the criticism of Trump. And she might have played her cards differently and been able to unify the party, but that's not what's happening. So looks like the House will have another vote, and she'll probably lose that position. She'll still be a member of Congress, but she won't be a leader. And so I just want to get, and I think that it says a lot, because the reason folks are concerned is because the Republicans could very easily take over Congress in the next elections in 2022. There's like 5 votes difference now. And with the census and redistricting and just all the things that Biden is doing with overreaching, it seems likely that will happen. The Trump energy is there too, though, and that will be a big part of the Republicans taking over. And I think there are a lot of folks in Congress who don't want her to squelch that. What do you guys think? You got any thoughts on this?
Yeah, she's obviously in trouble, and she's been pretty. When you're one of the 10 people, she keeps voting in this very small number of Republicans. And you're in leadership of the party. There's something out of whack there. you can have your different views, but you're probably not leading your party if you're, 1 out of 10 out of, 100 or 200 people. And so I think that's exactly. I think we are seeing a transition. The Republican Party under Trump changed from sort of the corporate, country club kind of a lot of that part of the party to where the corporations are now all woke and they're all way to the left. And so, Trump moved it towards the blue collar. And so you had, in every racial category, you had numbers actually go up, despite the attacks on Trump as some sort of racist, because that's what everybody's attacked for now. He actually got more votes from Black Americans, more votes from Hispanic Americans. And it was not necessarily just him, it was the whole party restructuring. And so now, which actually gives the Republican Party more opportunity to win more elections, because there are a lot more blue collar people than there are corporate elites. So but the interesting thing to watch is some of these Republican leaders are still living in the old days. And I think of both the North Dakota and South Dakota governors who both, took legislation that, hey, we don't want any guys in girls sports. And that's like a 90% issue, right? And they vetoed it. And it's because the Chamber of Commerce and the corporation said, hey, you need to veto it. They don't understand that that's not where their power base is anymore, and it's not even close. And I think Liz Cheney is a little out of step too, and I think she's going to find out, in a real strong way here in the very near future.
And it's not just their power base anymore; they are now actively against you.
Exactly
right. They are working diligently against every value that conservatives are supposed to be holding right now. Whether that's on what we talked to Hannah Smith about, critical race theory, or gender identity issues, life matters, religious liberty issues. There are corporations right now that are advocating for the passage of the Equality Act, not for the sexual orientation matters that are within it, but more for the fact that it would remove RFRA and remove that protection for the employees that they employ. Right. So corporate America has now left the farm. In fact, most conservative, and this would be crazy to have said half a decade ago. It would have been crazy to say this, that conservatives have more in line right now with the rank and file of every AFL-CIO house in the nation than we do with Chamber of Commerce meetings in the country.
It's amazing how the party has changed. This is what Liz Cheney wrote. She had an opinion piece in the Washington Post this week. She said, I am a conservative Republican, and the most conservative of conservative values is reverence for the rule of law. Each of us swears an oath before God to uphold our Constitution. The Electoral College has spoken. More than 60 state and federal courts, including multiple Trump-appointed judges, have rejected the former president's arguments and refused to overturn election results. That this is the rule of law. It's our constitutional system. And so she says the question now before us is, will we join Trump's crusade to delegitimize and undo the legal outcome of the 2020 election? And I guess the question I have, and we'll have to answer it after the break. When we'd like callers, if you all want to answer this or give your opinion, is that really the question? That's the question she's asking. Are we obligated as conservatives to decide if we want to join Trump's crusade to delegitimize the election? I mean, I'm a conservative, but I haven't really joined that crusade, and I don't know how many Republicans who still agree with a lot of what President Trump did and love what he's done to build the party. Does that mean that we want to delegitimize the last election? So that would be a question. I'd love to hear from you. 800-351-1212. Kelly and Jeremy will weigh in on that, and we'll be right back after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
This last year has been a challenge for our society, but now we can add to those challenges the political challenges that have come against our nation in the last few months. Victor Davis Hanson wonders, how much ruin do we have left? The President and Congress are challenging the constitutional order and centuries of custom and tradition. Hanson reminds us that a nation's institutions are its bedrock, yet the Electoral College and the Constitution's emphasis on individual states establishing voting laws are under assault. Already gone is the 176-year-old tradition of a pivotal November election day, the 152-year-old 9-member Supreme Court, the 184-year-old Senate filibuster, and the 62-year-old idea of a 50-state union are all being targeted by the new Democratic Party. Rewriting the election laws of every state, adding 4 additional members to the Supreme Court, ending the Senate filibuster, and turning the District of Columbia into a separate state seemed unlikely even a year ago. The political class seems ready to move forward on every one of these issues and much more. And then economic challenges lie ahead because of the national debt, which has now surpassed $28 trillion. After military campaigns in Afghanistan, Iraq, and Libya, our military seems more focused on the sort of people serving in the military. Some of the politicized top brass seem more worried about the politics of their own soldiers than the dangers of foreign militaries. And let's not forget that our nation is being pulled apart by protests, riots, and daily claims of systemic racism. America's on the brink, and I wonder whether this nation can stand much more. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Go deeper on topics like you just heard by visiting pointofview.net. That's pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Wow, I unleashed an avalanche of phone calls. We're talking about really the future of the Republican Party, and you know the White House has unleashed spending blowouts proposals, and some of them have already passed and been signed into law. Critical race theory, the Equality Act is coming upon us. Changing our elections forever so that conservatives could never win again. These are issues that Republicans ought to be really focusing on, not
court packing.
Right, court pack. Oh, yes. And I mean, things that would change the future of the country for all Americans. And so, there's an opportunity for Republicans to not only educate, have a bully pulpit, because there's such controversy over these things that aren't popular but are being forced on us, and yet there's this intramural fight in the party, and I think that Congresswoman Cheney is she's stirring the pot where she doesn't need to. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, it looks like it's going to cost her, and I think that's what's happening. And I mean, she makes these claims that it's the Trump cult of personality. I think she's got it backwards. I don't think that Trump caused all of these people to, follow him because they're just in love with his personality. I think it's the opposite. I think the people were watching the government totally not working. Seemed like the Democrats and the Republicans all just kind of went, ate as much, fat off of the American people as they could and then accomplished nothing. And people were ready to blow up the system. to do something. And so, and this is really the people were being ignored in all the deaths from the fentanyl and all these things that were going on were being ignored, and the people that were with the manufacturing jobs all exported overseas, and people that didn't have work, and that was all, nobody cared in Congress. And so I think Trump was a result of them, not the opposite. And I think that's why we saw this crazy election where all these counties that had voted for Obama were flipping and voting for Trump. And so I really think there's like we were talking about earlier, it's more of a movement and a change within the parties that's occurring, a realignment, than any personality. And so I just think she's totally missing what's going on, and that there's just a blue-collar revolution of sorts that's really going on.
Well, and my whole issue with this entire topic is this is an internecine battle, right? I mean, why? You've got the left trying to reorder elections under HB1. They're trying to preserve and perhaps even expand seats on the Supreme Court of the United States. They're trying to take over the third branch of government in addition to the first two that they currently own. You've got them trying to repeal RFRA through the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, through the Equality Act. And you've got a litany of legislation that they would be more than happy to pass right now if they could possibly get away with it, to the point of begging Joe Manchin to flip sides and remove the filibuster and all these things. And we're worried about who's going to be in leadership of the House of Representatives minority party. For goodness sakes, you guys want to go have that fight? Fine, go over there and have the fight. I've got the hordes at the gate that we need to start fighting against. Why don't we focus on that instead of trying to determine whether or not we've got the sharpest sword here or not? Go pick up a rock and stop the hordes at the gate.
There's so much at stake.
Yeah,
we don't need. It's an intramural.
There you go. That's better. Intramural was
intramural battle. Folks are weighing in here, so let me just take a call from Jack in Arizona. Hi, Jack. You're on Point of View. Thanks for calling.
Well, thank you. It's going well. Hopefully everything's fine with you guys.
Great.
Absolutely.
Super. I was just calling in referencing Representative Cheney. I think she's putting forth a false statement where she feels that Trump supporters are still wanting to overturn the last election. We can't do that, sadly. He's been certified. Biden's the current president. Listening to your comments while I was waiting, I agree. The Republican Party, silly to be having this intramural fights going on. As you said, the hordes at the gate. We need to be putting up a united front. And sadly, the never-Trumpers don't want to change or adjust to the changing of the Republican Party and to the blue-collar effect. So many people have been awoken by Trump's honesty, his willingness to fight, his obvious stance against the elite members of our Congress that have been in there for way too many years. So she's missing the point why people still support Trump and his ideas, I think.
I think you've got that. You've nailed that. And, I think there are a few people that are hopeful that they could somehow undo the election. But that's not most people across the country. And so yeah, Jack, thank you so much. Appreciate that call and that thought and that opinion. Sorry, I didn't know you had anything else to say. I hit that drop button. Let's go to Pam in the state of Georgia. We're going to the battleground states, the states where the elections were being questioned. Hi, Pam. Thanks for calling in. Are you there?
Yes, I am.
Okay.
I had been told there were two Pams, so I didn't know if it was me or the other Pam.
And they're both from Georgia too. So yeah,
exactly.
You're the first
Pam number one.
Oh, okay. Thank you. I will be brief so that someone else can talk. I served as the secretary of the my county Republican Party as well as the state I was in the state district secretary, and at that time I was in the 10th district. Now we're the 12th because we got a lot more population. And I saw when I joined the party when Ronald Reagan first ran, and he had a rough time with some of the party stalwarts. And I know that after he had served his second term and there were new people that wanted to get involved in the party, he brought a lot of new people in. I don't want to say a lot, many of the mainstream Republicans did not want new people. They did not like it. They looked at it as interference. They were afraid that they would, I guess, lose their power, and they wanted to keep it, like you said, the country club way. And I see with President Trump brought a lot of people into the party that had never even thought of getting involved politically because they're Americans and they have values, and they're realizing, hey, we could lose our country. So, I think the more the merrier. And I see with Liz Cheney.
I think it's
Liz
stupid
Cheney
not to want more people in your party. How do you win if you don't get more people in your party?
You don't. But I think Liz Cheney is looking at it from the old dinosaur position, and I think she's stuck in the power trap, like many old-time Democrats. Well, I don't know what you would call them now. But anyway, that's what I saw, and I thought, we can't do that. We're first Americans, regardless of party. George Washington did not want political parties, and I think this was why I think he was very prescient, and he saw down the road what could have happened. But anyway, this is what I think, and I hope they oust her simply because I think she is a detriment. Maybe she ought to consider joining the Democrat Party or maybe the Marxist Party. I don't know.
Yeah, well, that's what we could end up with if we keep fighting one another.
Exactly.
Pam, thank you so much. We appreciate your call. Ladies and gentlemen, we're coming up on a break. I probably can't take another call before the break, but we have a lot of them. I will just mention on this topic that a name has been put up, and it's if Liz Cheney is ousted, there'll probably be another female leader, House Conference Chairman Elsie Stefanik from New York, and you'll see. In what's written about her, she's hasn't had a super conservative voting record. But it's gotten a little more conservative over the years. And when Trump was embattled as president, she just jumped in and supported him, and she gained a lot of
impeachment, right? During
in the impeachment, the first one, and then the second one too. And she was a big Trump supporter. She began to change her positions on some things. She kind of just got a following and was able to raise a lot of money, and she has been able to give a lot of money out to other Republican members of Congress to help in their campaigns. So in a sense, she's got a lot of a following now, and so she'll probably take that spot. And some people are saying that she would actually be a good person to do that because she isn't as conservative, and she can draw all kinds of people that are perhaps not socially conservative into the party. I don't know if that's good or bad, but we'll be back after this break. Stay with us for more Point of View.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this.
are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Penna Dexter.
And Jeremy Dyes and Kelly Shackelford, and we're taking your calls, 800-351-1212. We've got another Pam, also from the state of Georgia. Pam, thanks for calling in. Let me get you hooked in. Hi, Pam.
Hi. How are y'all? Y'all doing great?
Great.
Doing good.
All right. I got two statements, short and sweet.
Good.
I'm almost 64, and I've raised my kids and a few of the neighbors, and I stopped. Miss Hannah on the phone earlier has encouraged me because my daughter, my niece, they can't get involved because like they want to because they got kids and everything else. Us grandmothers and grandfathers who thought we've raised our kids and don't have anything to do with it, we need to be at these board meetings. She really inspired me. She really woke me up. I thought I was finished. You know what I'm saying?
You're not finished. You got a lot.
Oh, no, we're not. We're
battles
just
to
beginning
fight.
because we're the ones that are so ticked off with the whole stupid, crazy system. And the kids can't do much because they're raising kids right now. But we as grandparents, we've got all this extra time. We're sitting on our butt, not doing much of nothing. Not really, but you know how it is. But we've got to choose a priority, and our priority is our grandchildren.
Yes, I'm a grandma too. And you know, you look at things a little differently because you see that beyond you and beyond your life, your kids' lives are going to go on and your grandchildren's lives are going to go on. And what kind of country are we going to have? What kind of community are we going to have?
Exactly.
So thanks for that
That's
encouragement, Pam. I think you're speaking our language here. We appreciate your call.
Number two.
Okay.
As a Christian, diehard, fundamentalist Baptist, they're the only ones that's going to be in heaven, ha ha, you know? No, it wasn't Mr. Trump's slick tongue that got him in office. It wasn't his charisma. It was the fact that he wasn't already bought out. He already had his multi-millions, and he wasn't going to be sent up there to just take more of our money and attaboy and all that good stuff and just lie to our faces. We voted for him knowing, and then we sent our Christian pastors and leaders to rally around him to guide him in the proper direction if he would accept it. And he did. And praise God, he did turn it around. And yes, it was stolen. And I'm one of the wackos that keep praying, Lord, according to our Constitution, there are things that could still be done. However, it's in God's hands. And we've got what we've got. And most of it is by our own doings.
All right, Pam. Thank you so much. I think Pam makes a lot of good common sense and certainly jumps in line with the idea that we've all got to be involved no matter what generation we're in. So speaking of being involved, we have seen this week in the state of Florida an election bill signed. And, you know, Florida was a state that had some challenges after the 2000 election. And they really did a lot to clean up their elections. But this time, Governor DeSantis and others in the state of Florida saw that there were still some things that could be done on election integrity in Florida. They passed them. The governor signed it this week. In the state of Texas, it's also working through the system. And I think that we will probably have an election integrity law before too long. Of course, these raise immediate opposition when they are going through the works and when they're signed. And, you know, in Georgia, that's one of the famous states where that has happened. And they're named, they're called attacks on voting rights. And so now we have those forces coming against these wonderful laws, but I think it just sort of dovetails with the idea that we need to control from the grassroots, and then we need to have laws that we can depend on that protect our vote. And that's what's happening in some of these states. So kudos to the state of Florida. And I would say, I don't know what you all know about where things are in Texas.
Yeah, it passed through yesterday out of committee in Texas, too. So it's moving in both places and a number of other states. I get tired of a lot of these stories on these election laws because it's what you see is usually so surface level, right? It's like one side says I'm for voter integrity and the other side says, these are voter suppression bills. And then you look and you say, okay, what provisions are, and they don't have any. It's just like all accusatory. So one of the things I like about DeSantis is he just talks about the specifics. And he said, one of the things they did is they stopped this idea that some political person can go and vote harvest and pick up, batches of votes and then go drop them in a box somewhere. I mean, that's just nuts. And I think most Americans know it's nuts. And so when the law they pass doesn't allow that, it doesn't keep anybody from voting. It wants to make it easier for people to vote. But they're not going to allow some operative to go and collect hundreds or thousands of ballots and drop them into a secret, drop box that nobody's watching. That's not how we do elections. And so, I just wish people would be honest about, if they've got a problem with a provision, talk about the provision. But a lot of the attacks you see, you'll just see the words voter suppression.
But voter ID seems to be synonymous with voter suppression.
Yeah, which is a lie.
Which is not true.
Yeah, I mean, when you do the polls, 80% of Americans think that you should have to provide your ID. Well, what about black voters? 70% of black voters think you should provide your ID. So it's like, but what they do is they say they're voter suppression, they're Jim Crow laws or whatever, and they think, well, there must be something really bad in there. And then they never talk about what's really bad in there because it's not really bad. It's stuff like, ballot harvesting and providing IDs and things like that. And so I just wish the journalists would even be better at be at least a minimal part of a real journalist and provide the real issue instead of this conclusory sort of personal attack stuff that is 98% of the journalism you read right now.
The way that I look at these laws is that we had COVID, and under COVID, there were some extraordinary measures that were taken. There was mail-in balloting that was allowed on a bigger scale. In some places, the ballots were just sent out en masse to people. We stopped that in Texas, but that's
and Florida.
Yeah, that's something that always has to be controlled. But if you've got a lot more mail-in balloting, you have to bring the election laws that apply to in-person voting and make them consistent, and also require ID for people that are voting by mail and absentee ballots to be verified with an ID and all of that. But to do that, and so these states are trying to do that, and they are doing it, but it's called voter suppression. And I think you're right, Kelly. I think the media picks up on that and allows that disinformation to go out. And we should just continue to ignore that.
Well, I'd like to ask them then to stop from suppressing my ability to travel, because I got to show my ID every time I go to the airport, and not just my ID. I got to actually provide a very specific. What's the one with the star on it now? You got to actually have that specific ID in order to fly anymore. Oh, and if I want to pick up baseball tickets at the local ballpark, if you can go to the local ballpark, that is, you got to show also your ID in order to pick them up at will call. For goodness sakes, I can't join my gym in my own county without showing not only my driver's license, but like a letter that I've received from the state to verify that my address is correct. It's harder for me to join a place where I can work out than it is to go vote. That doesn't seem to make a whole lot of sense. But all these people, I guess, are gym suppressionists and travel suppressionists and recreation suppressionists out there. I didn't know that we were so suppressed and discriminated against in this country by requiring a form of ID to do all these things. Oh, and don't even talk to us about drinking something with a percentage of alcohol in it, which you'll also have to provide a certain identification about as well. For goodness sakes, and then you actually have to have this little card to operate a motor vehicle in this country. That's just shocking. They're driver suppressionists in this country as well. I didn't realize that there were so many suppressionists in this country out there.
Yeah,
love it. All right, ladies and gentlemen. Well, I want to add one more topic to the list today because this was crazy and it drove me crazy because I've been very disturbed to see across the country teachers refusing to go back and teach kids that have been closed for a year, or the schools have been closed for a year. And then I noticed that the Centers for Disease Control's announcements with regard to what's okay as far as school goes. It was influenced by the teachers' union. So it's been the teachers' union that have been keeping teachers out of the classroom.
We are shocked.
Allowing
shocked,
them
I tell
to
you.
be
Shocked.
continue to be paid, but not to be there. And, for a while, I think that was okay with
Next,
a lot
you're
of
going to
people.
tell me that there was gambling in Casablanca. I mean, this is
It's a
shocking.
big shock. It's a big shock, I know. But listen, it's got real consequences, and we're starting to see it. And kids are so far behind because this has been allowed. And different states certainly are doing different things.
What they did with the CDC, I think, is problematic, though. I mean, the CDC is not supposed to be about politics; it's supposed to be about health. And so
we
I know
can't
we'll
even
talk
trust
about
them
that.
anymore. But right after this, stick with us because Kelly's itching to talk about it. We'll be right back. Education officials in the state of Virginia are taking a serious look at changing the way mathematics is taught. According to the Virginia Mercury, standardized test scores show that Black, Hispanic, and low-income students have lower pass rates than white and Asian students. There's a proposed initiative to lower the standards so struggling students can succeed. Opponents of the changes argue that the state should take steps to improve instruction for everyone. Virginia's consideration of this initiative is an example of the kind of thinking behind America's decline in essential subjects. A new buzzword in American institutions, including in education, is equity, not equality, which requires equal treatment, equal input, equal opportunity. Equity, instead, requires equal outcomes. Syndicated columnist Cal Thomas compares Virginia's math restructuring proposal to current attempts to remedy income equality. He points out that there are those who believe equity means everyone should make the same, and in the case of math, be equally stupid. The obvious right course is to encourage students who show aptitude in math and help those who don't. Promoting equal outcomes in math and other subjects, he writes, can only advance mediocrity, of which we have had quite enough. The nation tried imposing outcome-based education back in the 90s. Parents pushed back. Cal Thomas warns that dumbing down key subjects will only encourage the exodus from public schools that's taking place due to pandemic lockdowns. Paul Peterson, who directs the program on education policy and governance at Harvard, says over a third of students still aren't going to a classroom every day. In many urban districts, young children attend class only 2 days a week. The loss of learning has been devastating for low-income minority kids. Parents are fed up. In a recent Wall Street Journal op-ed, Dr. Peterson describes several states' recent expansions in school choice programs, concluding that the choice bandwagon has begun to roll. School choice brings the equal opportunity students need. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Some days it goes fast. We've got a lot to talk about. Kelly Shackelford and Jeremy Dyes are in studio with me for the final segment of Point of View. We've posted at pointofview.net an article about out of the Washington Post by John Levine talking about the American Federation of Teachers' influence on the Centers for Disease Control's school reopening guidelines. They lobbied the CDC and suggested language for their school reopening guidance, which was released in February. It was a full court press, says the New York Post. And then after that, the CDC put the brakes on a full reopening of in-person classrooms, which had been talked about in February. We saw the Post had emails between top CDC and American Federation of Teachers and White House officials that were going back and forth. The emails were obtained through a Freedom of Information Act request by the Americans for Public Trust and provided to the New York Post. They show a flurry of activity between CDC Director Dr. Rochelle Walensky, her top advisors, and union officials, with Biden brass being looped in the White House. And so, what's happened then was they sort of pulled back on what they were going to do with regard to reopening schools. And so we have seen, and I am, we're in Texas and we've seen most of the schools opened here. But I am sometimes shocked when I hear about friends in other states where, there's just no effort to reopen at all, or perhaps the teachers. There was one article I saw this week where the teachers were not in the classroom. A few students were there because they wanted to be there and they were so happy to be with friends. But the teachers were teaching from somewhere else because they don't want to be back in the classroom. And meanwhile, they're all still getting paid their full salaries and, benefits and all of that. And the money is going from the federal government to the states for schools that aren't reopening. It's crazy.
Yeah, the money shouldn't go to schools who aren't teaching. I mean, there's been lots of information on the harm to children by not being able to go to schools. The suicide rates increases, the all kinds of problems. There's been many physicians and medical leaders saying I think it was back in December, I remember Fauci saying, send the kids back to school. I mean, this is in December. And this is Fauci. This isn't, Donald Trump or somebody. So it's really ridiculous, but I think this shows a lot of what's going on. The idea that a teachers union, could send language for the CDC to change their guidelines and that the CDC adopted their guidelines verbatim.
What happened to following the science?
Yeah. I mean, this is really outrageous. And what I think what most Americans get, this really infuriates most Americans, is this is all politics and what can I get from me versus what's best for children. I mean, it's really despicable. Let's talk about what's best for these kids. I mean, let's talk about the year of education. Well, they've been doing it virtually. Well, everybody says that's incredibly invaluable compared to in person. And in addition to the medical causes, but they're just not being educated. I mean, it's a small percentage. A small percentage of the kids, are not losing a lot by doing things virtually. And then,
some that are more bent that way, others that have a lot of parental support.
That's right.
Seems like if they're older, they are much more familiar with doing things online.
Have more money,
right,
et cetera. So it's the poorer kids. It's the kids that's parents have to both be working. It's kids who are not maybe at the top in their talent, their education talent, and they're developing. And they've been set back at least a year and maybe more. And now we're just talking about education. We're not talking about all the other things that they're losing, the health issues. Though, I mean, at one time I saw a statistic, and this was a few months back, but it was, I think the number of suicides for those 10 was like up by 300 or 400%. So this is not like a game, a political game. This involves millions of children all over the country, and for this to be politicized in this way and not be based upon the science is what I think really irritates Americans, especially when you're talking about playing politics with children.
Jeremy, we've talked forever about the teachers' unions often being more about the teachers than about the students, and often about even leftist causes than the students. So we're not surprised on that side. But I think what is surprising is that the Centers for Disease Control would be not really following the science and not independently making a recommendation based upon its research and what it's finding across the country, but instead being influenced by the teachers' union.
Yeah, except we've forgotten the great warning from Ronald Reagan that the scariest words in the English language are, "I'm here from the government, I'm here to help." That clearly is, if we remember that, then we remember that we ought to have a very healthy skepticism of people in government that are purporting to say, hey, follow me, I'm the great wise person in this universe. We rejected that in the era of kings. That's not something we have anymore. We don't have the divine right of kings. We don't have even Moses, who saw Christ or saw God face to face and governs the people through a theocracy. That's not what we have right now. We have people who are fallible, fallen, and have an incentive to retain their own power. So it really should not be surprising to conservatives who take the distrust of power seriously that the CDC, being within the governmental structure, could be corrupted by politics, because when people claim absolute authority, what did Lord Acton tell us happens? It corrupts, absolutely. And this is exactly what has gone on here, whether that is through Dr. Fauci and his direction of things that has been given this sort of at least titular absolute authority from this his rhetorical skills or lack thereof in convincing the nation that we have to shut down, to the point now where the lobbyists for the unions in this country can convince science to change. We've gotten to the point now where we're no longer trusting the science, we're trusting the science teachers union, right? I mean, it's even further removed than trusting the science, so-called. So it ought not surprise us whether that makes us happy or sad. That's a different discussion, right? It ought to disappoint us.
It is disappointing.
That people would fall prey to the temptation of power. But, I mean, Tolkien was right to cast that curiosity, that temptation and power in a ring, right? And knowing what happens when you take that power, you will yourself fall prey to it.
You know, we've had the masking directives from the CDC. And for the most part, even Americans that didn't agree with it, didn't think a mask was effective, didn't think the requirements were fair. Most people have cooperated with that. Mm-hmm. So that's, I think, what makes me a little bit angry, is that Americans have tried. Mm-hmm. People have done things that they would have never done, had freedoms taken away that they wouldn't have agreed with. But this is the kids, and so I think that's what's a little bit irritating. This should have been
early on, way early on. Everybody should have been told, you go back to school and you teach. And if you have a danger yourself, if you have a condition or something that makes you very susceptible, and this is something that you need, then we will provide some sort of, ADA, Americans with Disability Act, accommodation for you. But everybody else, go back and teach. These are our kids, and but it hasn't happened because of politics. And again, I think that's the kind of thing Americans don't like.
I want to mention you can go to firstliberty.org or just click through from pointofview.net to find the live stream yesterday that was done on the military. I think there are going to be military-related live streams all month going on, but it was great. I listened this morning. You can go there to get that and information about all the First Liberty cases. So I want to send you there. Thank you for joining us, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you, Jeremy and Kelly. Have a nice weekend, everybody.
We live in a digital generation. Point of View is reaching this often overly plugged-in generation with truth. You can keep up with us 24 hours a day using your phone, your tablet, your laptop, or your desktop. Search for the Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, where you can keep up with today's issues, learn about current and upcoming guests by liking us on Facebook. Also, follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @PointOfViewRTS. That stands for Point of View Radio Talk Show. Learn, interact, make a difference with Point of View using new media. And here's one way you can make a big difference. Help us increase our reach by spreading the word among your friends. Share a Facebook post. Tag us in a tweet. With enough joining us to plant seeds, we'll see a tremendous harvest. Come on, it only takes a minute. Search for Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, @Point of View RTS on Twitter, and subscribe to the Point of View Radio Talk Show channel on YouTube. Learn, interact, share. The Point of View Radio Talk Show. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.